I was a typical little runt that used to think a monster was in my closet. When I was 5 years old, I was always hopping out of my bed and dashing straight into my dad's room screaming, "He's here, he's here!" Like the laid back kind of guy he was, my dad would get up in the middle of the night without a fuss and walk me back to my room. The first thing he did once we got there was go to my closet and open the door to show me for the 100th time that there was nothing there. Often he spun back around with a smile, pointing right at the empty space in the doorway. "You have one hell of an imagination, sport," he once said. "Now let's get you back to bed." It was routine for him to tuck me in and give me a gentle kiss on my forehead every time he did this, followed by one last smile before heading out. Even at that young age, I wasn't easily swayed by Dad's late night closet inspections. I knew something was there. How it just seemed to disappear every time Dad checked the closet was beyond me. When Dad wasn't around to check anything, I'd hear persistent noises coming from the closet. Sometimes it was a classic bump in the night. I used to also hear humming, like someone trying to desperately escape a hand covering their mouth. Other times I swore I heard crying. At other times I swore I heard crying. I remember thinking, now why is the monster crying? The monster's crying made me cry for many nights. My little heart was leaping rapidly as I watched the door shake, and the doorknob rattle as whatever was inside tried to get out. As I got older, I was still experiencing the same, and I can tell you one thing, it was barely any less frightening than before. But being older also meant that it wouldn't be as acceptable to go running into a parent's room every time I got scared throughout the night, so I found ways to deal with it. From then on, when I heard the first hum or cry from the closet, I just pull the covers over my head and wait for it to stop, which it usually did, or put my earbuds on and turn the music up to high volume. Several times I'd take them out and still hear bumping and crying. I went years not knowing exactly what was lingering in the pit of my closet, the main reason being I always made sure to keep my closet door locked and shut before going to bed. Other than the strange noises coming from my closet, I would also hear Dad walking around the house every other night. At random times I'd hear him walk all over the house, opening doors and rummaging. Anytime I heard him coming down the hall towards my room, I pretended to be asleep. He always walked past and continued on doing whatever he was doing. The first time he did enter my room, I was surprised to see that he was fully clothed. He had on his usual outdoor fit, his flannel shirt, cargo pants and baseball cap. Why was he all dressed up in the middle of the night? He went straight to my closet and pried the door open. After rummaging inside for a few seconds, he closed the door, then came over to my bed to give me a kiss on the cheek. He exited my room afterwards. Some nights he'd leave the house and I'd hear the engine on his pickup truck go off outside. After hopping out of bed and peering out my window, I could see him cruising past me on the road. He usually came pulling back in about an hour later. Then he'd go to the shed that sat many yards away from my window. Where could he possibly need to go past 3 in the morning? The weirdest thing was, he never mentioned any of it to me on the following day. Never told me about him getting up in the middle of the night to make rounds. One night when Dad came into my room, he forgot to close the closet back before he left. But this time I was asleep when he came in. I just so happened to wake up and see my closet door slowly creaking open. I hopped out of bed and rushed over to close it, but I stopped when something reached out of the crack. A hand. It was very filthy and dirt covered. The hand reached around for some seconds until it got a hold of the edge of the door. The door opened wider. Slowly I started to back away, fear now starting to consume me. But the monster was about to consume me next. We slipped up, Dad slipped up, and the monster would finally get what it salivated for after so long. As the door creaked open ever wider, I felt my heart leaping in my chest. I turned to run before the door opened completely, but it was too late. By the time I took my first step, the creature in the doorway had already made itself visible. Well, it may as well have been a creature. The creature in my closet turned out to be very human. It was a young woman. Strings of her wet and soggy hair stuck to the sides of her face, which was streaked with dirt and sweat. She wore nothing but a bra and torn panties. The rest of her body appeared to be slightly filthier than her face, like she hadn't showered in months. She looked as if she wasn't able to stand or walk, or at least had a hard time doing so. She struggled to even stay on her knees. As soon as the woman saw me, her eyes widened, and she started reaching out to me with one hand. At the time, the sight of this scared the shit out of me, but the more I look back and think about this moment, it's now obvious that the woman had more fear in her than I did. She was terrified. If she could scream, I'm pretty sure she would have awakened my father by now. She wanted to scream, only problem was, her lips had been stapled shut from one end to the other. The closest she could get to screaming was the familiar humming I've grown accustomed to after so many years. In the middle of all the desperate humming, I swear I could hear her trying to say please, or get me out of here. Her eyes grew watery, then many tears streamed down her filthy face. She kept reaching out to me, then she started crawling towards me in a wobbly fashion. Still scared out of my mind, I backed away until I hit the wall behind me. Then I dropped to the floor, staring at the thing that I'm pretty sure used to be a normal, decent looking young lady. I knew I could have stood up and bolted past her with ease, but I couldn't look away. What was happening before my eyes was so surreal. So this was it? A thing that's been driving me crazy since I was 5? Where did it come from? I wondered what she'd do when she reached me, but to my surprise, when she saw my open bedroom door, she turned away and crawled in that direction instead. As she slowly made her way out of my bedroom, I noticed one more chilling detail about her. Her right foot, it was missing. There was nothing there but a mushy stump with dead tissue and dried blood smeared around the ankle. I was relieved that she was no longer crawling towards me, but I was still uncomfortable with the fact the sick woman was about to crawl all over our house. But I sure as hell wasn't about to stop her. No way was I gonna touch that thing. I heard a vehicle pull up outside, then the sound of an engine going off. Dad. I wasn't aware he was gone. I was thinking he was still in the house the whole time. When I heard his truck door open and close, I anticipated the moment he came into the house. When I heard the front door open, I hurriedly hopped back into bed and threw the covers over my head. Then I created a small opening in the sheets to peep out of. The sound of Dad's boots out in the hall seemed to be unnerving to the woman, as her shaking and wobbling grew worse when it started. She had just made it to the doorway of my bedroom when Dad spotted her. "Oh no you don't, darling," Dad said with a chuckle. The woman tried to scream, but of course couldn't. Dad picked her up and threw her over his shoulder. She wiggled around, delivering several weak kicks and punches to the air in an attempt to escape Dad's grasp, but it did no good. Dad went to my closet, then I heard him close and lock something inside. On the way out, the woman continued to struggle and make several feeble attempts at breaking free. I peeped her grotesque face looking at me as Dad left. "Now I've had enough of you," Dad muttered out in the hall. As soon as the front door opened and closed again, I right away hopped back out of bed and ran out to the living room. While crouching down, I looked out the window and saw Dad walking to his truck with the woman still on his shoulder. He went to the back seat and opened the door. After reaching inside to grab something, he shut the door again and began walking towards the shed. My attention went back to the truck again, specifically to the passenger side. Someone's head suddenly shot up as if they were asleep or knocked unconscious at first. Another woman. From where I was, it looked like her mouth was duct taped. Both of her arms appeared to be bound behind her back, like the woman in my closet. She looked terrified and confused. When I saw Dad enter the shed, I carefully opened the front door before stepping outside, making sure not to make too much noise. I trotted over to the truck and got a closer look at the woman in the passenger seat. Yeah, her mouth was duct taped. She had definitely been crying at one point too, indicated by her smeared eyeliner and the dried tears on her face. She jumped as soon as she laid eyes on me. Then we stared at each other through the glass for seconds. Her eyes were wide, begging me, clearly wanting to mutter, "Help, don't just stand there." I tried to open the door, but I was instantly reminded of the auto-lock feature the truck had. The woman's face scrunched up to cry more when she saw I couldn't open it. Then more tears started to dance in her eyes, prepared to wash away the dried ones. Crouching again, I started tiptoeing towards the shed. I felt bad having to leave the woman behind, but at least she was aware I tried. The shed had a light posted above the doorway that shined a few yards away from where the shed was, so I couldn't just run straight for the door without risking Dad unexpectedly popping out and spotting me. Instead, I used the surrounding darkness to hide in until I reached the side of the building. I put my back to the wall and made my way to the edge of the doorframe one careful step at a time. "Looks like I need to put a better lock on that door," I heard Dad mutter. I took a quick glance at the woman in the truck and saw that she was watching me. When I peeped around the corner of the doorframe, I saw the first woman Dad carried out of my room. She was standing on her scarred knees, body facing me. She had her head hung low, staring at the ground, her soggy hair just dangling. Dad had his back turned, rummaging through the toolbox nearby. "But I fault you. You should know better," he said. The woman held her head up for a few seconds, which caused my heart to make a giant leap that almost left me panting. Seeing her mouth stapled up like that was just too much for me. But there was something else behind the woman that caught my attention. Right next to another empty compartment was a small door. It was open, and there was nothing but blackness inside. This was a surprise to me because of all the times I've been in the shed with Dad, I've never known this area to have a door. When I saw Dad starting to turn around, I backed away, then leaned in again only to see him standing in front of the woman. He was holding something at his side, a staple gun. I started to panic again upon seeing this, but calmed down when I saw Dad place the staple gun behind him on the workbench. He reached into one of his pockets and drew a large Bowie knife. I could hear the woman starting to whimper. "You had some nerve," Dad chuckled before raising his knife. He stabbed the woman somewhere within her upper body, but I couldn't see, as he was in the way. I could only hear the blade puncture her, as she coughed and choked. As Dad started moving his arm in a back and forth motion, I could also hear the woman's blood splashing the shed floor relentlessly. "No," I whispered, very silently. I backed away to keep from seeing what was going on, and put both my hands over my face. Standing there listening to Dad cut through that woman's tissue and bodily organs put me on the brink of tears. But the sound of the truck's alarms going off intervened. I glanced towards the truck and I saw the passenger door wide open. The second woman that was in the passenger seat hastily hopped out and began running away. "Oh shit," Dad said. I quickly ran back to the side of the shed just in time to avoid Dad dashing out and running after the woman. As soon as him and the second woman faded away into the dark distance, I ran into the shed, but the grotesque sight before me stopped me in my tracks. The first woman was nearly decapitated, her head barely hanging onto the rest of her body by a mere piece of flesh and bone. Blood rushed out of her exposed neck. My attention went to the small open door again. I made sure not to step into the blood pool as I made my way around the woman's mutilated body. I was so shocked that part of me couldn't take my eyes off of it. When I got to the open small door, I peered inside and saw almost nothing but the same blackness I saw from the doorway, but being closer allowed me to get a deeper gaze inside, which revealed a tunnel that went several feet ahead. I could see traces of dim light glowing from an unknown source further down in there. Weird. I took one look behind me before climbing inside and starting to crawl. At the beginning, there was a downward steep angle that almost sent me tumbling down, but I caught myself and continued. The length of the tunnel seemed to be much greater than what I anticipated, as around a minute had passed and I was still crawling. A few cobwebs wrapped themselves around my face here and there, and I spotted a couple spiders crawling along the way. If it weren't for that small source of light ahead, I may not have gone in. It would have been like crawling into an abyss without it. After more seconds of crawling, I eventually came across an area that wasn't as narrow and closed in as the rest of the tunnel. It was wider in width and height. I was even able to stand up and walk around in it, but I had to drop down from where I was to do so. It was like a small room. The first thing I see is a very bright fluorescent light hanging along one of the walls. Beneath that was an old, worn out and dingy mattress lying on the floor. Just above the mattress looked like a metal hook, in which several women's bras hang. I thought I saw some dark spots on the mattress, so I moved in closer to check. Yep, blood splatter. Although at the time I didn't know what was going on, being down there was still unnerving. I could sense there was something very wrong about the place. On the opposite side of where I dropped down was another opening that looked identical to what I just dropped down from. The tunnel extended even further than this. At this point, I was already yards away from the shed. What could possibly go beyond this area? I left the area and climbed into the opening on the other side. After crawling from there a few more minutes, I surprisingly reached an end. It was of course dark, so at first it appeared the end was dead. I thought I'd have to turn around and backtrack the entire distance I came. After reaching and feeling around, I accidentally lifted something above me. Whatever it was heavily fell back down. I lifted it again. It appeared to be a trapdoor of some sort. I sighed, thinking there was yet more to discover. I lifted the door once again, this time cracking it open completely. After raising my head through the opening, I was surprised to see my bedroom. In front of me was my bed a short distance away. I could hear the soft breeze from my open window. Confused, I climbed out of the hole I was in and glanced behind me. Nothing there but a patch of darkness with some of my junk sticking out in different areas. I closed the door I came out of and found that at first glance it was very hard to notice the boundary between the door and the rest of the surrounding floor. This was hiding in plain sight the whole time. But why would he want to put this in my closet? My guess was that he thought I'd never think to look in my own room for a secret dungeon. "Get off of me, let me go," I heard a feminine voice scream outside the window. Before I even came close to the window, I could already see Dad from a distance dragging the woman towards the shed by her leg. She tried her best to kick Dad with her free leg as she wildly threw her arms, screaming. "Please," she continued begging until her and Dad both entered the shed. A minute later, Dad came back out again and shut the door behind him. When I saw him turn and began heading in my direction, I quickly ducked and then trotted to my bed while still crouching. I laid under the covers and waited until I heard the front door open. The sound of his boots thudding the floor seemed more terrifying to me now. As the thuds got closer to my bedroom, my heart leaped uncontrollably. In my mind, this was no longer my dad in my room anymore. This was someone else. Feeling the covers being pulled from over my head made me jump, but luckily I didn't think he noticed. I shut my eyes and pretended to be asleep. The smell of gasoline and kerosene radiating from his clothing filled my nostrils. He kissed me on the forehead before re-tucking me in. I heard him go to the closet and shut the door, then he left my room before leaving the house. There was a brief moment of peace, but it wasn't too long before the horrifying screams of agony echoed from the shed. Unfortunately, the strange sounds in my closet didn't stop. For many years going on, I was still tormented by the shaking and humming on the other side of the door. After that night, I knew it was down there, the woman I saw in Dad's truck. Every time I heard the humming and bumping from then on, all I could do was just imagine her stapled lips and filth-covered body, just desperately beating and clawing away in hopes of escape, wanting to scream but can't, no matter how scared she was. I was sure she met the same fate as the first woman, but being aware of what it actually was inside barely reduced the fear. Honestly, knowing the truth may have made things worse. Although I saw Dad kill the monster in the shed, the monster still wasn't really dead. It continued to live underground beneath my closet, psychologically tormenting and filling me with the fear I'm sure was mutual. The monster wasn't going to die anytime soon, as it also came into my room and gave me a kiss every night.